The way Meghan Markle appeared to mirror the late Princess Diana in Harper's Bazaar quickly sparked global criticism and mockery. Inside Buckingham Palace, a typically calm morning was abruptly disturbed when an urgent letter arrived from California, addressed directly to Princess Anne. The sender was Meghan Markle, and this time her tone was far from subtle. According to insiders, the message was formal, but carried a sharp edge, laying out bold demands. She reportedly asked for the return of a valuable diamond piece she claimed belonged to her, and even went as far as requesting the transfer of the iconic tiara famously associated with Princess Diana. Sources suggest the contents of the letter angered Princess Anne so deeply that she broke from standard protocol, choosing not to pass the matter to the palace's legal team, but to handle it herself. Rather than stepping back, Meghan is said to have followed up with additional actions aimed at gaining leverage, moves that many believed could pressure the royal family into giving in. However, the situation soon shifted in the opposite direction. Instead of gaining ground, Meghan reportedly faced consequences that came at a heavy cost to her public image and reputation. This raises a bigger question. How far did Meghan Markle go to provoke such a strong reaction from Princess Anne? And what would Anne do next? Would it be a powerful counterattack, or something more calculated that left no room for escape? The morning at Buckingham Palace unfolded under a pale gray London sky, with soft light streaming through tall windows and falling across long corridors lined with deep red carpets. Among the usual stack of official correspondence from global leaders, one envelope stood out immediately. It had been sent express from California. And while the Montecito postmark was no longer unfamiliar, what made this different was the name on the front. It wasn't addressed to King Charles I, but to Princess Anne. Even in her 70s, Anne carried herself with the strength and discipline she had become known for. The only daughter of Queen Elizabeth I, and a woman who had completed over 20,000 official engagements in a lifetime of duty. When her secretary carefully placed the letter on a silver tray in front of her, Anne didn't react right away. She remained focused on her charity documents, her reading glasses resting low on her nose, giving off the quiet intensity of someone who had dedicated her entire life to protecting the legacy of the Windsor family. Her relationship with Meghan Markle had remained distant ever since the dramatic events of early 2020. To Anne, Meghan was not simply a modern outsider with different views, but someone who had disrupted traditions that Anne had spent decades upholding. As her fingers finally moved to open the letter, the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. There was a noticeable tension, as if something significant was about to unfold. As Princess Anne began reading, it became immediately clear that Meghan had skipped all formal pleasantries and gone straight to her point. The tone of the letter carried a strong sense of entitlement, presented as if it were a matter of rightful claim. The first demand came across almost like a quiet accusation. Meghan requested the return of diamond earrings valued at £450,000, stating they had been given to her in 2020 during the tense period before her departure from the UK, but were no longer in her possession. The wording was vague yet suggestive, hinting that the palace may have retained them, which caused a slight tightening in Anne's expression. However, it was the second demand that truly changed everything. Meghan proposed that the Spencer tiara, the iconic piece forever linked to Princess Diana's wedding day, should be given to her as a permanent gift. At that moment, Anne's grip on the paper subtly tightened, the edges creasing under her fingers. She knew that tiara well. It wasn't part of the royal collection, but a treasured heirloom belonging to the Spencer family for generations. For someone who had stepped away from royal duties and was now living abroad, to make such a request crossed a line Anne could not ignore. Memories of 2020 rushed back, broken trust, difficult departures, and lasting damage left behind by Meghan and Harry. Nearby, The secretary waited quietly, expecting Anne to follow the usual process and hand the matter over to legal advisors. But Anne did something unexpected. She closed the file with a firm, echoing snap, her calm exterior briefly revealing a flash of anger before settling into a cold, controlled determination. Instead of handing the matter over, Anne made her decision instantly. She knew that if the palace handled it through routine channels, the response would be softened with careful diplomatic language, the same kind Meghan had used before to push boundaries further. In a calm but firm voice, Anne stated that she would respond personally. She dismissed everyone from the room, choosing to face the situation alone, sitting at her desk with a blank sheet of paper and her fountain pen. The quiet weight of the moment settled around her. The soft London light cast her silhouette like something unmovable, steady and controlled. As she prepared to write, Anne understood this was no longer just a family disagreement. It had become something far more serious, a clear line that needed to be drawn. Her fingers brushed lightly against the old oak surface of the desk, grounding her in the long history she represented. Her expression turned sharp and focused, as if she could almost see Meghan standing across from her despite the distance. One thought remained firm in her mind. There are limits, and some of them cannot be crossed. Without hesitation, she lowered the pen to the page, ready to respond not with emotion, but with precision and authority. The study where Princess Anne worked, whether at Gatcombe Park or a quiet room in Windsor, always carried a sense of purpose rather than luxury. The faint scent of old paper, polished oak, and Earl Grey tea filled the air, creating an atmosphere focused entirely on duty. In front of her lay a sheet of official writing paper marked with the royal crest, still and waiting. Anne did not rush. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she reflected on the principles she had spent her entire life defending. To her, royal assets were never just valuable objects. They were pieces of history, entrusted to the family as part of a much larger responsibility. When she finally began to write, her pen moved with steady precision, each word clear, controlled, and without unnecessary emotion. She opened the letter by stating a fundamental truth. The assets of the royal family are not personal belongings, but part of a public trust meant to support the duties and dignity of the crown. They were not items to be exchanged, claimed, or collected by any individual, regardless of status. Her deliberate choice to avoid titles carried its own message, quietly placing Meghan outside the circle of royal privilege. When addressing the issue of the diamond earrings, her tone remained firm and detached. She stated that after reviewing the official gift records from 2020, there was no evidence that such an item had ever been registered as a personal gift. The message was clear, without needing to be said directly. Either there was a mistake, or the claim had no factual basis. Anne made it equally clear that the palace held no responsibility to confirm or return something that did not exist in its records. If Meghan believed otherwise, she suggested she could pursue the matter through legal channels. It was a calm statement on the surface. But underneath, it carried the weight of a direct challenge. When Anne moved on to address the request for the Spencer tiara, her expression grew even more severe. She didn't rely on emotion or sentiment, but on clear, undeniable facts. In a precise and measured tone, she explained that the tiara was not part of the royal collection at all, but a historic heirloom belonging to the Spencer family for generations. It existed entirely outside the authority of the crown, making the request not only inappropriate, but fundamentally misguided. Each sentence carried a quiet firmness, correcting the assumption behind the demand without raising her voice. Anne wasn't just refusing. She was reinforcing the meaning of legacy itself, something defined by responsibility and heritage, not personal desire. As she reached the end of the letter, she added a carefully worded warning, continued claims without factual basis, she wrote, could result in formal legal clarification, which might require Meghan to return to Britain to address the matter properly. It wasn't an invitation, but a clear signal of consequences. Anne understood well that such a step would place Meghan in a position she had always avoided, directly within the rigid structure of British law. After signing the letter, Anne placed her pen down without reviewing a single line. In her mind, there was nothing to reconsider. She leaned back, slightly, a quiet sense of finality, settling in as she looked out toward the open grounds beyond the window. Aware that whatever followed, she had made her position absolutely clear. The letter was finally sealed with red wax, carrying the weight of centuries of royal authority and unshaken resolve. At the Montecito estate in California, sunlight poured through the palm trees, casting shifting patterns across the elegant modern interiors of Meghan's private study. Seated at her desk, she received the envelope directly from London. The royal crest immediately caught her attention, and for a brief moment, there was a familiar sense of anticipation. But the moment she opened it and began reading, that feeling quickly disappeared. The tone was nothing like the diplomatic softness she had come to expect from the palace. Instead, the response was direct, sharp, and unyielding. Every paragraph seemed carefully constructed to dismantle her claims with clinical precision. As she read further, Meghan's expression changed noticeably. Her brows tightened when she reached the section denying any record of the diamond earrings. It wasn't just a refusal, it felt like a dismissal of her credibility altogether. The words surrounding the Spencer tiara struck even harder. To Meghan, it had symbolized a deeper connection to Princess Diana, a way of aligning herself with that legacy. But Anne's explanation of its family origin stripped away that emotional meaning entirely. The language was factual, cold, and final, leaving no space for interpretation. Meghan stood up and began pacing the room, her thoughts moving quickly as she tried to process the shift in control. For the first time, she felt the narrative slipping away from her. What she had expected to be a negotiation now felt like a closed door, and behind it stood a response she could not easily challenge. As news of the letter and its contents began to spread, the atmosphere around the situation shifted rapidly. Articles accusing the palace of harsh treatment and emotional pressure started appearing across international media, painting a picture of a cold institution clashing with a modern public figure. At Buckingham Palace, the mood became noticeably more restrained, with staff moving carefully to avoid adding fuel to an already sensitive situation. Yet Princess Anne herself remained remarkably composed. She did not rush to respond to the growing noise or engage in public debate. Instead, she chose a path that the monarchy rarely takes in such a direct form. Rather than allowing speculation to continue, she made the unexpected decision to address the matter publicly. This was not done in the grand ceremonial rooms of the palace, but in a more practical setting used for official meetings with charitable organizations. When she entered the room, she was dressed in a simple, well-fitted dark suit, her presence calm but commanding. There was no need for dramatic gestures or emotional language. Her quiet authority was enough to focus every attention in the room. Reporters who had expected a guarded or evasive statement instead found themselves facing a direct, controlled, and fully prepared response. Anne did not respond to the emotional accusations circulating in the media, nor did she engage with the language of humiliation or victimhood that had begun to dominate headlines. Instead, she chose to bring the focus back to facts. With steady control, she opened a file and began reading portions of Meghan's original letter aloud in front of the press. The room immediately shifted in tone as her calm voice listed the exact demands the £450,000 diamond earrings, and the request for the Spencer tiara. There was no dramatization in her delivery, only precision. By doing this, she stripped away any layers of interpretation that had been built around the story. What remained was the raw content of the request itself, exposed in plain terms before the public. Her posture stayed composed, her expression unreadable. As she continued to speak, she made it clear that royal assets were not items for negotiation or personal settlement, but part of a protected heritage governed by strict rules and accountability. Every sentence reinforced the same message. The institution would not bend to pressure, emotional framing, or external influence without raising her voice. Anne turned the entire narrative back onto its foundation of facts, leaving no space for distortion or selective interpretation. As the press conference came to an end, Anne stood up without hesitation and left the room. Refusing to linger for further questions. The sound of camera shutters and murmuring voices followed her as she walked away. But her expression remained unchanged. Her final statement echoed strongly through the media. The royal family does not negotiate over what does not belong to it. Those words quickly became the headline across major outlets worldwide, shaping the direction of the entire story. In the aftermath, the situation settled into a tense stillness between London and California. Meghan Markle remained in Montecito, facing a wave of global criticism that showed no sign of slowing down, while Princess Anne returned to her duties with the same quiet discipline as before. As if nothing had disturbed her routine, the Spencer tiara remained safely within the Spencer family's protection, untouched and undisturbed, standing as a symbol of heritage rather than possession. Over time, the confrontation came to be seen not as a simple dispute, but as a clear moment where boundaries were firmly drawn. And as the world continued debating the outcome, one thing became evident: this was not a story of negotiation or compromise, but of unwavering resolve, meeting unchecked ambition, leaving a divide that neither side was willing to cross again.